assisting.
It's just some tragic thing that some sick person has come along and did that I hope they find.
People who normally don't even lock their doors tell us tonight they'll sleep with shotguns by their beds.
This was a terrible thing to walk in on. You can imagine whatever you think to be the very worst possible thing you could see in the middle of the night, and then multiply that by about 6, and maybe you'd have it.
Something that don't happen in Wiley very often. People are scared, they're concerned about it.
Wiley's a small town, and a lot of people know everybody around. They've lived around it for years, and we're just scared that it might be somebody we know, someone that we thought was, sweet guy.
Almost everyone has the latest version of the latest rumor, but Wiley's police chief tells us he doesn't have much of anything.
Well, I've been here for almost the whole trial, and I can't believe it.
Two best friends are sitting at a table having a discussion. One best friend would ask the other a question, and the other would answer. The question that was asked and the answer given in this conversation would change the course of their lives as well as their families' lives forever. But in order to understand why this question and answer was so detrimental, we kind of have to do a little backpedaling to see exactly how we got to this point. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing well. If you're new to the channel, hi, I'm AJ and this is your dose of true crime. We do all things true crime on this channel, but currently I'm on a domestic violence / twisted cheating scandal streak, so that's kind of like where we are at the moment. But if true crime is your cup of tea, consider subscribing to the channel after watching or listening to today's story. And at the end of all of my videos, I always post a playlist, so if you want to continue listening to more cases from this channel, you can do so by clicking that at the end. So also, quick plug, I'm trying a different delivery approach with today's story. I really want to focus on getting more videos out to you guys, more stories. In order for that to be realistic, I need to focus on actually reading what has been written here, and then I'll kind of like chime in on certain parts, looking into the camera and whatnot, so we're still engaging, I'm still here with you, you're still here with me, and then I'm still telling the story. Bars. I always got bars for y'all. So anyway, let me know what y'all think about today's video delivery down in the comment section. I always appreciate feedback. Let's get into it. So the year is 1980, and it had been about a month since the gruesome horror movie Friday the 13th was released, when a woman was discovered brutally murdered in her home, lying in a pool of her own blood. This was already shocking news because the area where she lived was a very quiet town, so things like this didn't normally happen. But what took this crime up another notch was not just the fact that she was found dead in her home, but it was how she was found. And she was found mutilated into several pieces. So when investigators are called out to look into the crime scene, unfortunately there really wasn't that much evidence for them to gather except for two things. The first was a bloody set of footprints, and the other was a blood-covered axe. So to investigators, it seemed like there was a crazed axe killer on the loose who was heavily inspired by the Friday the 13th movie. But eventually one person would come forward with a story that would literally blow their minds and send the city into a frenzy. So today's story takes place in a small town called Wiley, which is located just outside of Dallas, Texas. So for all of my Texans, this one's for you. So around the early 1970s, several families migrated out of major cities like Dallas to the quote-unquote country into small towns such as Wiley. And basically they would do this to escape sky-high living costs, buildings, and abundance of crimes. And to be honest, that sounds very much like 2023 right now, so nothing has really changed since 1970. The Montgomery family was no exception, and they actually moved to Wiley in the year of 1977. So the Montgomery family consisted of a son and a daughter, as well as a husband and wife, Pat and Candace Montgomery. And Candace also went by the name Candy, which, quick plug, there ain't nothing sweet about this girl. Candy and Pat met in their early 20s when they were working at Texas Instruments. And at first, Candy did not really care for Pat at all. She was not interested whatsoever. He was literally bottom of the barrel to her. But once she found out that he was an engineer, ooh, baby, all of a sudden, he went from flatline to damn you fine. Just that fast. And he wasn't just any type of engineer. He was an electrical engineer. So, baby, you know. I chase paper. If you are a Plies fan, you know what I'm talking about right now. So anyway, once she found out that he was an electrical engineer, her mind shifted and they became a couple. So after arriving in Wiley, Pat continued to work to provide money to the family, and Candy stayed at home, devoting her time to being the ideal housewife. So to add to her daily routine, Candy frequently visited a neighboring church named First United Methodist Church of Lucas, where she indulged in organizing and taking part in activities offered by the church. So it was at this church where she also began to befriend many of the residents, including a woman named Betty Gore. So at the time that Betty and Candy met, Betty was married to a man named Allan Gore, and she was working as an elementary school teacher while being a first-time mother to their daughter, Elisa. Now, I'm not sure if it's Alyssa or Elisa, but I'm going with Elisa because the grammar police in me is telling me that because there's only one S, that it's Elisa or Elisa and not Alyssa, which would be two S's. So anyway, Elisa and Candy's daughter, Jennifer or Jenny, they were best friends. So naturally, Betty and Candace also became acquaintances and eventually best friends down the line. Later on, their friendship grew stronger over the two women's shared interest in singing for the church choir and in sharing ups and downs in their personal lives. Unlike Candy and Pat, Betty and Allan had an instant attraction to each other that sealed their fate together. Yet their journey through marriage wasn't consistently smooth. In addition to suffering from postpartum depression, the stress of being a teacher to unruly students began to consume Betty, and she found herself yearning for her husband's presence next to her all the time. She would constantly call him while he was away on business trips, and one time she even begged Allan's boss to not send him away so that he could literally be up under her all the time. Like, she was in dire need of her husband. She was super needy. And it was starting to get to Allan. But through it all, Betty had Candy to help her cope with all of the issues she was dealing with. And despite the constant bickering, Allan a lot of times would just pick and choose his battles for the sake of their family. But over time, his frustrations began to pile up and he found himself losing interest in Betty. So I do want to kind of discuss postpartum depression a little bit further. So for those who are unfamiliar with what that is, basically it's where after giving birth, women kind of go into a deep depression, sometimes not even connecting with the baby at all because they're just in that deep of a depression. Or sometimes they just get really sad and just, you know, a whole slew of emotions basically. And sometimes it can be instant, sometimes it can come later, sometimes it's quick, sometimes it drags out. You just don't know. Every person is different. But what really helps women to get through that is having a strong partner by their side. And I don't think that Allan really fully grasped what Betty was going through. And then also we have to remember that this is the 1970s. So mental health was not really recognized like it is now, with outlets on how to target it, how to recognize it, and then how to target it and deal with it, right? So I think that Betty was just really, really struggling, and because she really didn't have a supportive husband, she leaned more on Candy than anything else since her husband was always gone and he really just didn't understand. And honestly, I feel like he probably used those business trips as an excuse to escape Betty because he didn't know how to deal with it. So while Betty is going through this postpartum depression, Candy is also going through her own personal issues as well. She's finding herself being very bored at home, and the things that she once took pride in doing, she's now loathing on a day-to-day basis. She's just extremely bored, and she finds herself complaining to her friends a lot about how bland her life is and how, quote-unquote, very boring it is. And that she wishes that she could have fireworks. Now, you know that's dangerous when a woman starts saying, I want fireworks. She's looking for something. She's looking for some action. So, like I said, Candy she's out there, you know, and when she wants something, she's gonna get it. Just know that. So one day in the late summer days of 1978, the Montgomerys and the Gores engaged in a game of volleyball at their local church court. Now, unintentionally, Allan and Candy were both trying to make a play for the ball, and they inadvertently bumped into each other at the same time. So that part right there was just so funny to me, because I envision like a cartoon, you know how there's like two love interests and they don't realize they're love interests, and then they bump into each other, and then there's all those little hearts and, you know, shooting stars all over the place. That's kind of like what I envisioned when when I read this part right here. They bump into each other, and this little insignificant bump became the highlight of Candy's summer, as she made a shocking revelation that she thought Allan was sexy. Now, I don't know if it really took the bump. I think she been knew that he was sexy, but she just used that as an excuse. So for the next few weeks, Candy fantasized about being intimate with Allan. This is the same Allan who is married to Betty, the same Betty who is her best friend. Told y'all, she's a sour patch, but she don't never turn sweet. So in any case, she would play over encounters that she had with Allan over and over and over, just wondering if maybe Allan would be open to having a secret affair with her. Like, the girl was plotting on her best friend's husband. As far as Candy knew, they always had a really good friendship with each other, and she just really couldn't help but wonder if Allan would truly take her up on her offer, and if maybe their interactions meant something deeper than she had ever realized. There's only one way to find out though, right? So as the days progressed and the desires grew stronger, Candy began to find it difficult to be silent about her new feelings towards Allan. So one day in October of 1978, after a church choir practice, as soon as the parking lot cleared out, Candy rushed towards Allan's car and hopped in it. Homegirl was not wasting time. So without any question, she just shot her shot, and she confessed to Allan saying, "I've been thinking about you a lot, and it's really bothering me, and I don't know whether I want you to do anything about it or not." End quote. The audacity of Candy, the boldness of Candy. Like, she really sat here and just told this man, "I want you, but I don't know if I want you to want me." Like, do you even know if this man is interested in you, girl? This is how you know she thinks highly of herself, because it's the fact that she already assumed that he was going to want her back. But she wasn't sure if she wanted him to want her back because, you know, of the dynamic of their relationships. That girl Candy, wow. Allan himself already had a very perplexing week. So he's now sitting here dumbfounded looking at Candy like, is she serious? When Candy realized that he was just sitting there looking stuck and he wasn't saying anything, she fixed her mouth to ask him again, but even more direct. So she then goes on to say, "Would you be interested in having an affair?" Like, if that ain't more clear, I don't know how much more clear she could have gotten. Allan was evidently shocked and hesitant about the proposition, and he didn't want to jeopardize his marriage with Betty because, duh, that's your wife. And she was also pregnant with their second child now. However, he couldn't help but feel flattered that Candy was really throwing that thing at him, okay? She was like, "I want you to milk my kitty." But after some thinking, Allan would agree to it. But it wouldn't come without rules. There needed to be some ground rules before they engaged in what would be a very crazy affair. So they mutually agreed that this affair was solely driven by their pursuit of physical pleasures, one that was unfulfilled by their spouses, with no intentions of developing emotional relationships or attachments. So to ensure this, they established a set of strict laws to be followed by both of them at all times. I want you to remember that part. By both of them at all times. So, for example, they were only allowed to meet in motels outside of Dallas, for which they both would pay separately for, and they were to only meet during Allan's lunch hour so that Betty wouldn't take notice of him going missing. And as a result of them meeting during his lunch hour, Candy would have to prepare him lunch so that it wouldn't look suspicious that he'd come home starving, because why are you hungry when you have a whole hour to go get food? Listen, the way these two crossed those T's and dotted those I's, I gotta give it to them. They really thought that through. But out of all the rules, the most crucial one of all is that neither one of them could develop emotional attachment, and if they did, they immediately had to stop the affair. So once all of the details were laid out about the affair, they designated a specific date, which was 12/12/1978, as the official commencement of their scandalous affair. Yeah. So they decided to go ahead and start havoc on their marriage 2 weeks before Christmas. Put that into perspective. So unbeknownst to Betty and Pat, their love affair began and everything was going according to plan. Candy even went so far as to host the baby shower for Betty, all while she was aware of her betrayal to her best friend. However, a turning point in Candy and Allan's story came when Allan and Betty welcomed their second daughter in July of 1979. With his desires fulfilled, Allan would return home to Betty and didn't feel the usual frustrations that he typically felt towards her. So he would let out his frustrations on Candy, and then that helped him to be a better husband towards his wife, which is so crazy. So crazy. But that's how he was dealing and coping with everything. On the flip side, behind closed doors, Candy was in a fight with herself, attempting to deny the bludgeoning feelings she was developing for Allan. It never works. Whenever people say we are not going to catch feelings, it is human nature. We are designed to catch feelings. It's never a matter of if, it's always a matter of when. I don't know why people still haven't learned, but anyways. After spending time with Allan, she began to feel alive and validated, all of the things that she was deprived from while she was with Pat. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Allan, but still came clean about her feelings anyways, understanding that the rules were the rules. But to her surprise, Allan refused to end the affair and even insisted that they continue it. And that is where he effed up. But just remember that, okay? Just remember that when Candy followed the rules, he broke them and said, nah, shawty, we gonna keep this thing going. We gonna keep this thing alive. I need you right now. I got a new baby. I'm starting to be able to handle my marriage at home. I don't care about your little feelings for me. You just gonna have to deal with that. But we gonna keep going with this affair. That's basically what it came down to. So, while maintaining his secretive affair with Candy, Allan was also committed to strengthening his marriage with Betty. I know that sounds crazy. This whole thing is crazy. They became frequent visitors of a program called Marriage Encounters, and as it worked its wonders, one day after a long time of feeling invalidated, Betty found herself desiring to be intimate with her husband. So she's starting to get back to her old self. She's starting to feel like that vivacious girl that Allan first met, feeling like she got that old thing back. Though Betty that Allan met was slowly resurfacing. So much so that she felt confident enough to be the first person to initiate sex between the two of them. But surprisingly, Allan was unwilling to respond to his wife. And that crushed her. He loved her, but he just wasn't attracted to her in that way because of the affair he was having with Candy. Candy was putting it down on Allan. Whatever she was doing was superseding Betty by far. For whatever reason, he just couldn't get himself to sleep with his own wife. So after being denied by her husband, she felt like all the work that they had put in to working on each other was a complete waste. Betty felt so embarrassed by the fact that her own husband didn't want to be intimate with her, especially since she was never the assertive one. Allan knew the root of his problem was his affair with Candy, which had become so satisfying that it hindered him from being intimate with his own wife. Now, it was his turn to attempt to end the relationship. But what Allan didn't realize was that Candy was so deeply attached to him that she adamantly refused to end the affair. However, according to Allan, he managed to bring the relationship to an end by October of 1979. Remember earlier when I said both of them had to abide by the rules, right? Both of them. I just think it's so ironic that Allan, the person who was kind of hesitant to even join in on this affair, was the main one dictating how the affair went. Because although Candy brought it up, she did follow the rules. Like, once she discovered that she was developing feelings, she understood that there was a chance that the affair could end because of that. But Allan, who felt like this affair was helping him in his marriage, said basically, like, I don't give a damn that you have feelings. You're going to have to figure out how to deal with that, but I still want to smash, because me smashing you is helping me deal with my wife. But then it was only when he realized how much turmoil it was causing in his marriage, at that point, he dictated that their affair should end. Only because it was inconvenient now to him. Not because of the fact that Candy had feelings for him. That's selfish. But I just wanted to point that out. That's a narcissistic fool right there. That's crazy how selfish of a person he is. And that circles back to how inconsistent of a husband he was to Betty as well, because he didn't even try to take the time to understand what Betty was going through. He just ran away from her and went on business trips to avoid dealing with her. So it forced her with no other option but to lean on Candy, who in turn is stealing her husband behind her back. Allan is starting to look a little bit worse than Candy now. He's starting to look a little worse. Now that mistakes were corrected and feelings were erased, everything was expected to return to its usual routine. However, what actually transpired in the future was a plethora of bloodshed. So now we are back to the beginning of the video where I mentioned two friends sitting at a table where a question was asked and an answer was given. So on Friday morning of June 13th, 1980, Candy paid a visit to Betty's house to pick up Elisa's swimsuit because she was staying the night at Candy's house because her and Jenny are best friends and they were planning to do a whole little get-together. So Candy really didn't plan on staying for too long, but Betty insisted on a small chit-chat. Betty's behavior seemed a little unwavering, but Candy couldn't help but sense a growing tension between the two of them. So to confirm her suspicions, Betty's expression suddenly changed to that of a blank stare, and she calmly asked Candy one question. Are you sleeping with Allan? So as you could imagine, Candy was shocked to know that somehow Betty must have put two and two together, that her best friend and her husband were sleeping together behind her back. Now initially, Cindy did deny the accusations, but she knew her best friend wasn't stupid, and if she was asking the question, it's because there was something that probably confirmed what she already knew. So Candy came clean and said yes. As Candy sat there thinking about how in the world Betty could have figured out they were having an affair, she watched Betty slowly get up from her seat and disappear into the utility room before reappearing with a 3-foot axe that they used to chop firewood. So in an instant, Candy's life was flashing before her eyes, and she began to cry, pleading for her life and apologizing for her wrongful acts. But all that did was go through one ear and out the other. Betty saw red, and that was it. She took the axe and she swung it at Candy, and it struck her in the head and in her toes. But she swung it so hard that she lost control of the axe, and Candy ended up grabbing it, and then she ended up swinging it back at Betty, and it struck her in the back of her head, and she started bleeding profusely. So in a final attempt to save their friendship, Candy spoke through her tears, and she pleaded with Betty, stating that, please let me go, I don't want him. By now, Betty was weak due to the significant blood loss, but with the last surge of energy that she had, she got up, she picked up the axe, and with one hand, she brought her finger to her lips and hushed Candy. Little did she know that this action right here was going to trigger a very, very, very sensitive memory for Candy. Candy's mind went back to a traumatic experience where she was really young at the time and she was injured and she was bleeding. And her mother shook her vigorously and gestured her to shh, because she didn't want any unwanted attention from bystanders. Betty's identical actions to her mother triggered Candy, and in the blink of an eye, it sent Candy into a frenzy of a rage, causing her to disassociate herself from her mind and lose complete control. She ended up grabbing the axe from Betty, and she ended up hacking her 41 times. So as you could imagine, that not only left her dead, but left her incapacitated and disfigured. So that afternoon, Allan was out on a business trip when he realized that his wife wasn't bombarding his landline with phone calls. So he decided to check up on her, just to see how things were going. But unfortunately, she wasn't answering any of his phone calls. So instead, he decided to reach out to Candy to see if everything was okay. And she actually reassured Allan that she had seemed normal from when she visited Betty earlier in the morning. So Allan went ahead and continued trying to reach out to her, but all of the calls continued to go unanswered. So like any worried husband, he actually contacted the neighbor to go to the house and check on Betty. And unfortunately for that neighbor, they would be the ones to discover the lifeless body of Betty Gore lying in a pool of her own blood. As investigations commenced, Allan came forward and confessed to his secret affair with Candy and mentioned how he ended it as she refused to do so. This provided a solid foundation for a motive to kill, and soon Candy was arrested for the murder of Betty Gore.
You have the right to remain silent and not say anything. Any oral or written statement may be used in evidence in this court. You have the right to have your lawyer present to advise you before or during any questioning by peace officers or attorneys representing the state. If you are too poor to hire a lawyer, then the court will appoint a lawyer for free of charge, and he can advise you before or during any questioning. You can decide to talk with anyone, and you can stop talking to them anytime you want. Above rights or continuing rights which can be heard by you at any stage of proceedings. You understand that?
Later, with the help of hypnotic therapy, Candy was subjected to reveal the dreadful events that unfolded on the morning of June 13th, as well as her past trauma, which triggered her actions. Once the trial began, Candy portrayed herself as a victim and proclaimed that her actions were a result of self-defense as Betty tried to attack her first. Fortunately for her, she had the support of some members of the jury as well as from her husband Pat, who stood by her despite knowing her infidelity while it occurred. Listen, when I tell you Candy got the riz, Candy got the riz. So on October 30th, 1980, Candy Montgomery was found not guilty for the murder of Betty Gore, and she was acquitted from the case, allowing her to live a free life. Candy and Pat moved to Georgia, but 4 years later underwent a divorce. Pat changed his name to James and went into hiding. However, Candy, who changed her name back to her maiden name, Candace Wheeler, ironically became a mental health counselor. So in the end, Betty Gore never received the justice that she deserved, and Allan Gore had to move on with his life along with his 2 daughters. And that, you guys, will conclude the story of Candy Montgomery. And I just feel so bad for Pat, because honestly, Pat was literally the most oblivious person out of the entire story. Like I said in the beginning, although there were 4 people involved, it's really 3. Because Pat was literally just living his life, working, paying the bills, while his wife was just running around town scandalously, sleeping around with her best friend's husband. So that's going to wrap up today's true crime story. And this case, honestly, is giving Avis, Carla, and Keon. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's another twisted cheating scandal that I covered here on my channel, which you can find through the playlist that will pop up at the end of this video. But I want to hear from you guys. Do you agree with the verdict that was given to Candy? Do you think she deserved to be acquitted with no consequences? Or do you think that she should have been charged with maybe manslaughter or third-degree murder? I don't even know what that would classify as, but let me know down in the comments what you think. But I just think it's so unfair that Betty, who was literally the innocent person in all of this, ended up being the one to lose her life. I mean, it was her fault because she did go grab the axe, but ultimately she did not deserve to die. And Candy didn't deserve to be attacked by an axe, even though she was grimy as hell for what she did. She didn't deserve to be attacked either. I just think that it's so unfair that the person in the middle of all of this walks away wiping his hands and he gets a second chance at life. Very much like the trio I just mentioned.
But like I said, the video on that trio is included in a playlist of all of my true crime cases, which is going to pop up at the end of the video. However, I did want to bring up one last thing that I thought about. I don't know if anyone else thought this deep. I don't know why I'm always doing this, but I wonder what came of the friendship of the daughters, Elisa and Jenny. You know, it's so unfortunate that these two best friends probably got ripped apart because of their parents' selfish actions. They were only thinking about themselves in this whole ordeal, and the people that suffered the most were the kids. Despite the fact that Pat relocated the family, I wonder if they ever tried to reach out to one another. Like, I don't know how hard it would be for them, you know, as the daughter of someone who killed your best friend's mom, or being the daughter of someone who cheated on your mom with your best friend's mom. That's crazy. That's a crazy story and stigma to have follow you for the rest of your life. But it wouldn't be wrong for them to try and be friends, because it's not like the girls did anything to each other per se. They just happened to be the spawn of people who didn't know how to control themselves. So we'll just keep it cute for the video. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know down in the comments what you think. And if you were in either of their shoes, Jenny, who is Candy's daughter, or Elisa, who was Betty's daughter, like, would you be able to, I guess, uphold or maintain the friendship that y'all had? Or would you even try to reach out to your, I guess, ex-best friend after everything that happened? I don't know. I mean, it's not like it was her fault, you know, but like I said, it does bring back memories too. So I could see both ways. But anyway, that's all for today's video. I'm done rambling. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on the road to 4K. And I will see you in the next video. Stay safe.